Welcome back to Francis Kelsey School. Continuing on with our seminars. This is Pre-Calculus 11, Learning Guide 13, Rationals, Part 2. So we're continuing on now from the previous guide, which we looked at. And now we're going to be doing some adding and subtracting of rational with common denominators. So if we look at the first question here. Now, in this case, we are subtracting two rationals. Okay, so when I see subtraction signs, I do what's called the additive inverse rule. I change this to a plus, and then everything to the right of it becomes the opposite. All right? So this one often gets missed, that one right there. People change the first one here, but forget about the second one. So pay attention to details and try not to miss that. Okay, so another way of looking at it is you have a negative sign with a bracket. So when you distribute the negative in, it becomes the opposite. Okay, now we realize that if I have a b there and I have a b there, I know my common denominator is b. Now all we do now is bring down our numerators. So this comes down and these two guys come down. All right, so they just come and form our numerator. Now once I have my numerator, I want to collect like terms. So let's look at the top for like terms. So I notice that there's a 2a and a minus a, so that gets me a, because 2 take away 1 is 1. And I have that 1. So there is my simplified expression. And now the non-permissibles, because I have a b right here, the non-permissible is b cannot equal 0. Okay, let's move over to b. So plus sign, so I don't have to worry about that. Okay, common denominator, so there we go. Bring down those guys into your numerator. Now, always check to see if something can factor. So in this case, it can factor because I notice that a 2 is common there and there. So now I get x plus 4 there. Okay, before I cancel out, let's just do our non-permissibles because it's good to do it before you cancel out because sometimes you can miss. So we have x plus 4 equals 0. Move over. X equals negative 4, and there's our non-permissible. All right, now we can cancel out. So that can cancel that out, and so I'm left with just the 2. So there's my solution to that expression. Okay, so let's just try these ones. Let's just try the second one. Okay, I see a negative sign, so plus, move that up, so plus sign. Like terms, x plus 5 is my common denominator. Bring down my two numerators. So 4x plus 2x, collect like terms. So 6x all over x plus 5. And there's nothing to factor here, so there's my solution. And my restriction, or my non-permissible, is negative 5. Okay, now we're going to look at one that we have some addition and subtraction all in the same question. All right, I see a minus sign there, so a subtraction sign, so I change that to a plus and change that to a negative. Now I look for a common denominator. Well, I have a common denominator. There's the w minus 3 there, and there's the w plus 1. So I have that common denominator. So now I want to collect or bring all these terms down. Okay, now I want to collect like terms. So I have this and this, so minus 3w. This and this is minus 5. All right, now always check to see if it can factor. So I know, looking at this expression here, It looks like it's going to be a triple play, so let's just try factoring through our triple play method. And these two, we get negative 10. So numbers that multiply to 10 and add to 3 is 5 and 2. And I want a negative 3, so negative and a plus. All over 2, that divides into that. And that cancels that one. So it's W plus 1. Okay, so I know this factors to that, so I put it all over W plus 1. Okay, let's do our restrictions or our non-permissibles. So our non-permissibles is W cannot equal, looking at the bottom here, negative 1. And now I cancel out. And so my solution is that. Okay. Now we're moving on to expressions that do not have a common denominator. So they're different from each other. So when I look at this question, I would make that into a fraction. Let's make that a plus and a minus. All right, so now, how are we going to find a common denominator? So now we're going to look for the lowest common denominator. So if you look at this, I have an x and an x squared. So I know that you always pick the highest degree. So x squared. And there's just a y there, so I know that's it. So there is now my lowest common denominator. Now I need to find that because I want to create a common denominator. And then I have to multiply the numerator by the missing pieces of that common denominator. So now if you look down the next step here, I know my common denominator is x squared y, so I'm missing an x in this first part, see? X times y, so I'm missing the x, so I put an x up there. Now in the second one I have an x squared, it's missing the y of that common denominator, so I multiply y by y. And here I have a 1, so it's missing the whole thing, so I multiply there. So now it's time to multiply. Well, first of all, bring down your lowest common denominator, just put that in, because that is your lowest common denominator. Now, you look at the numerators now. So 2x times x is 2x squared. 4 times y is 4y. And remember, this is a negative. Negative 3 times that is that. Okay, can we factor? It doesn't look like it because there's no y here. And there's no x there, and 3 is a prime number. So that's it. Then our non-permissibles. Our x cannot equal 0 because of that right there, and y cannot equal 0. Okay, so now let's go to B, and we have a situation here, a new term for you guys, and you're going to see this in Math 12 a lot, and you'll see it in this guide. It's what we call a complex fraction, because I have a fraction in my numerator or denominator, or in this case, I have it in both numerator and denominator. Okay, so when you have a complex fraction, you're going to look for a common denominator. So I'm looking at this denominator and this denominator. So what's the common denominator? So we know it's x, because it's the only one. So now, once I find my common denominator x, I'm going to multiply everything. So x there, and x there, and x there, and x there. Everything gets multiplied by that common denominator, because this now eliminates your denominators. So you have no complex fraction anymore. So now I have this x times 1 is x minus 1. And I have this x times x is x squared. And I have that minus 1. Okay, now I'm left with this expression. Okay, now looking at that, can we, again, that big word, that really important word, factor. Well, yes, the bottom here, right down here, this bottom part, is difference of squares. It factors to x minus 1, x plus 1. All right? Now from there, we should do our non-permissibles before we cancel out. X cannot equal 1 and -1. And now we can cross out. All right? And now we're left with not a 0, but we're left with a 1 there. Some people forget that one. You have to put a 1 there. And x plus 1. So there is our answer. Okay, so let's just try these ones. So let's look at this. I can see that can factor. So it's p plus 1, p minus 1. And over here I have p plus 1. All right. So now let's find our lowest common denominator. What's it going to be? Well, we definitely have the p plus 1. It's common on both sides. And this is the other common. Just because it's not on both sides, it just drops down. Okay, so now I know my answer. The bottom part. There's the common denominator. Now, let's do some multiplying. So here, this side, nothing's missing. The lowest common denominator is the same as that denominator. So I'm timesing this by 1, so that's easy. It's 4. Okay, over here, on this side, I have p plus 1. So it's missing this part. So I go here, p minus 1. So I get 3p minus 3. All right, now let's collect like terms. So I get 3p plus 1 all over p plus 1, p minus 1. Okay, let's do our non-permissibles. So we get p cannot equal -1 and 1. All right, and can we factor? Can we factor here? And it doesn't look like it. So there is our simplified solution with our non-permissibles. Okay, now let's go to the complex one. All right, so I know it's complex because here is my fraction right there. I have a fraction in the bottom too. So what's my lowest common denominator? Well, I only have an n and an n, so it's an n. So n there, n there, n there, n there. Cross, 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 cross. That's how you get rid of complex fractions. So what are we left with? 2 times n is 2n minus 4 is on top. N times n is n squared minus 4. Okay, now we're going to factor. So 2 is common, n minus 2, and difference of squares, so n plus 2, n minus 2. Let's do our non-permissibles. So our non-permissibles, so looking at this and this, so we have n cannot equal 2 and -2. So there's our non-permissibles. Now let's cancel. So we're left with that. All right? And don't do this, because I've seen people do it, the old cherry pick, and they leave 1 over n. Nope, that is not right. You cannot cherry pick. So you just leave it as 2 over n plus 2. Because there's no 2, it's in this one here. Remember, if you want to take out a 2, it has to be common, that term, and that term. So don't do that mistake.